Alrighty. Well, Chris, would you
And
like to introduce yourself?
Okay, I'm Chris Coffey, and I own and operate Techstar Inspections. Been doing it about 12 years.
she's a veteran,
Yes, in the coolest way, right?
right?
Love it. I know
Um,
Stephanie was like, "You're gonna love him," and I did. And so I was very excited when she told me that you were going to be joining us for one of the meetings because I genuinely enjoyed the way you laid everything out, you explained everything. And yeah, I'm excited to have you today.
Appreciate it.
Mhm.
well, and I think, one of the things that I love about working with Chris is I love the way that he explains things to our clients and provides education along and with that. So, Chris, another question that we always get, what is your standard time length for inspection? And this has come up because we had an agent last week that was like, hey, are home inspections supposed to take this many hours? How long? I mean, I know every house is different, and I know that some houses are obviously much bigger, much smaller. Average standard home, how long does it usually take to do your home inspection?
Um, Probably 2 to 3 hours. For an average home, like
Right.
the one that I had with Paris last time I went up there was a much newer home that was very much smaller, very
Yep.
simple, so it didn't take quite as long. But I would say that's probably a good range to start with. I had one last week that was about 6 hours, but it was two houses and like 6,000 square feet in a pool.
Right.
And so that was a very long inspection and a very long review with the client and the agent, but that's okay. That's what taking the
Yeah.
time to be able to talk to people so they can understand everything. So it's going to vary. The bigger, the older, and if it's pier and beam, like I've got a pier and beam this afternoon, and it's a 120-year-old house, and so it's probably going to be a long afternoon, and that's okay. But that's just
That's so cool.
really just it has a lot to do with the house as well, how well the
Right.
house likes to be inspected, as I always say.
Nice. Okay, so you mentioned a pool. Um, is that something that's extra, or is that something that is usually an add-on, the way the plumbing scope works?
Right. So in the SOP for inspectors and on the report form, it is an optional system, and so
Okay.
that's something that most inspectors or companies are going to probably let them know, like,
Got
hey,
it.
that's extra or that's optional, or maybe we don't inspect pools or whatever. So clients and other real estate folks will need to know that they need to ask if that's what something that inspector is going to do, or if they're going to have to hire a pool company or something like that to come in. Like, for instance, I don't inspect above ground pools or above ground hot tubs. Those ones you can, go out and buy and put together
Right.
that don't run underground or anything. And that's just something I have to convey to people I don't do. And I have never done it. It's just one of those things. And but yeah, when you look at the report form, you'll see it as an optional system at the end so that people can choose whether they want to add that or not.
Gotcha.
Interesting. I didn't know that. Are there any other items that you do the same with, like that's also an add-on? Sorry, I'm
Yeah,
trying
so like septic systems are going to be an optional system as well.
to.
I think everything's on there. Irrigation systems is one. I know a lot of guys that add that into their inspection for free, and that's cool. And I have done it before, but typically it's an optional system, so someone could charge extra, and it's not going to be something that's necessarily required on the report form to or an inspector to actually inspect. So it'd be something for to ask if they're going to test the sprinkler system, and that's one of those ones that's going to be a yeah, like any of those things, they're optional. Like any item, somebody needs to have the knowledge or ability to be able to inspect those things. So if you had somebody say, "I've never really inspected a pool," you'd be like, "Well, maybe we need to get a pool company out here, to come check it out," because it would be one of those things where they're not. I can assure you, not all pools are the same, and there's always something going on with them. If you ever want to do another Zoom class, I could tell you a whole thing about the last 5 years of what they call pool cancer. And if you don't know anything about that, I can tell you a whole lot of what I've learned about pools and what's been happening since, when COVID started and the concrete and a lot of things. And so there's things that when you you explain that to people and they're looking at these cracking and stuff like that. And then you get a pool person to come out and they can explain that. And that's one of those ones that it takes another bit of knowledge to go in and be able to study that and become educated so that you can convey that to real estate folks and your clients as well.
Right.
Interesting.
Very.
Well, technically,
very.
anything optional that a person feels like they could add on to an inspection and put that in that system, that section, that's what that's for. For instance, if like someone was going to do a whole house scan with infrared for like maybe energy efficiency or something, that could be something they could add, or maybe other built-in appliances like an outdoor kitchen is a really good one. That was why other was put in the optional systems to cover things like outdoor kitchens, so that I don't have to try and put 5 different refrigerators, on one section, if I decide to do an appliance, and that could be something too, because things like inspecting refrigerators and ice makers and washers and dryers are not required in the SOP. And that could be something that an inspector chooses to add optionally if they want to.
Good to know.
So what's most overlooked? Like, what do you feel like you run into the most, that's something that gets overlooked, gets missed on routine home maintenance?
Probably this time of year, people don't flush their primary condensate drain for their AC, whether it be in the attic or a closet or something like that. That's probably one of the most common things that we see where it's been either it is clogged up or backing up, or there's signs of it that's caused damage somewhere. That's probably a most common thing that's easily maintenanced and avoidable. Probably this time of year would probably be my thing. Most common items, we could talk about that too, but something that would be easily maintained and not they would have to be worried about would be something like that, like a primary condensate drain. I always tell all my clients and my agent friends, Dr. YouTube is the best way to go learn how to flush your primary condensate drain. It's actually good. And Dr. Google too, but always brings you to videos. And I'm a visual learner, so if I can show people how to flush it or send them to a right video how to do it, that's the way to go. But a little bit of bleach or vinegar goes a long way to flush out a condensate drain.
Nice.
Now, I just wrote a note for my husband. Thank you. He's gonna be like, isn't that for you? Aren't these meetings for you, not me? Look, honeydews, please.
Okay, what else? So another thing that I've noticed, the dishwashers, Chris, are never that we always get flagged there. So what do you tell us about that?
You know what specifically on the dishwasher? I bet I can guess.
Guess.
I bet it's the drain line.
Yes.
It's not running to what's called a sanitary high loop, or
Mhm.
every so often, and especially like higher end homes, I run into one that's called it's like an air gap, but it's a breather that's a little silver looking tube that fits up on the counter, and they run the drain line up through it, so it makes an air gap. And the whole purpose of what that drain is for is so that the drain of the dishwasher is above the level of the kitchen sink drain, and it's to help prevent anti-siphoning, so that you don't siphon water out of the dishwasher back into the supply, or vice versa. And that's the purpose. I always joke about it. It's a super expensive repair. It could take like a zip tie and tie it up to the highest point under the counter, and that would meet the standard for what that's calling for. And that is whether no matter how old the home is, that is an item in the SOP that inspectors are required to report as deficient. That is lacking what's called a sanitary high loop. That's probably a very common deficiency to see on a dishwasher, is that, if that was what you were talking about.
It was because that's been every home inspection that Chris and I have done together. That's something that he's caught every time.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted the opportunity for you to share that, so that other agents can understand what that is too. Because the first time he explained it to me, I was like, we need what? So thank you for that. Okay, what are some of the common things that you encounter that may have a huge impact on the sale of a home? What are the big things? What are the huge red flags for you?
Always signs of moisture. That's probably a big one because, obviously on a day and time that you do an inspection, it may not be raining or may not have rained a considerable amount of time. I think the last time I saw you, Stephanie, it hadn't rained for probably 3 or 4 months. And if you see that evidence of something, it's just one of those ones that's a snapshot in time what you're trying to see. And then it's all the stuff that you can't tell with moisture that most people, I would say, probably get concerned about. And then you get into. So any time with moisture, like I test shower pans a lot. A lot of inspectors don't do that. And when you start having a shower pan that leaks, that's a very big expense. There's no real repair for a failed or faulty shower pan other than pulling it out and redoing it. And you guys would know way more what that's going to cost than I do if you had to hire a contractor or a plumber to come in and redo something like a shower pan. Obviously, things with a roof, if you go on a roof's got significant hail damage, I use a very, what I call non-offensive term whenever I say that. I call it strike-like damage like from a small spherical object. I use things like that. Would you believe there are roofing guys and insurance people that do not like inspectors calling it hail damage? And so I formulated that comment as kind of like, gotcha, but that's stuff like that is going to be one too, because I use the term a lot and I talk to people about stuff like that is when you buy a house that's got hail damage, that could be considered a pre-existing condition. And I hate that term so much, but it really depends on who's looking at it at the time. And so that's when, you have a home inspector and they point out that there's something like that, then you have the opportunity to, on behalf of your clients, hire somebody else to give another opinion. And then essentially that kind of passes the torch in a way. Giving somebody else who might be more of a subject matter expert on whether or not something has enough damage to constitute a claim could be a little different. Obviously, everybody worries about foundation issues.
Big one.
That's a huge one. And I was just talking about this with some newer inspectors that I had met recently. And it was all about how you formulate your comments to replicate what you're trying to say. Obviously, you've been in and out of enough houses. I make the joke all the time. People say, how long have you been doing this? I say, well, I've been in and out of houses pretty much all my life. Some people laugh at that, but that's okay. It's all, when you look at something like a foundation, there's a lot that has to go on, and like I see listings all the time. It says, recently had foundation repair. Well, when I talk to clients about foundation repair, I tell them that just because something has been done doesn't mean it was 100% done correctly. Or it may have just been leveled, they may have gone. I saw a house recently, they used that expanding foam that's made for doing concrete flat work like driveways and sidewalks. That's what the contractor used to try and repair the foundation. Very fortunately, the buyer's agent was very smart and she was kind of like, what the heck? Was that right? No, not at all. And so that's one of those things. But if you didn't know, it wasn't something that was right. And so when it comes to looking at foundations, especially like old pier and beams, for instance, like the one I have today, there is 100% chance that I'm going to see signs of structural movement. May not always be bad, but it's just because the home has been there than probably some of us in our combined age here together. And that's one of those things that you're going to have to expect because the soil moves and the house will move as a result. And that's one of those ones that's just going to happen. But in the best interest of people that have concerns with signs of foundation movement, whether they see them themselves or they're pointed out by the lowly home inspector, it is in their best interest to get a second opinion on it. And I always tell people if they get someone to come out and measure a foundation and find out how level it is at the time, they can use that as a guide to monitor for future movement. I do a lot of what's called site levels for new construction. And what we do is we go out and use a level and you're checking to see how level the foundation is from point to point. You'd be very surprised how many of them are not level at all. And there's some tolerance that's allowed. So just because a floor is not level does not necessarily mean a foundation is failing. It just means that that's an observation to show people that now you have a baseline to measure something off of when you look at that part of it. But that foundation is probably one of the biggest, to be concerned about. And the last one I'll probably say is electrical. There's a lot that can happen with electrical, especially in remodeled homes. And remodeled homes can be scary, especially for inspectors. I've only ever been electrocuted once, and that was shocked. I wasn't electrocuted to injure me enough to hurt my pride. That was in a remodeled home, a flip that was done very poorly in the electrical part of it. And that's going to be a big red flag for lots of reasons, because when you run into issues with electrical that's been done poorly, not only is it can potentially a safety or fire hazard, you also have concerns about if people are going to have insurance issues whenever they try to get into a house. So if an inspector tells you about something like, branch circuit aluminum wiring in a house, that's not something that just needs to be brushed off. It needs to be made sure. There's ways that it can be much safer, but at the end of the day, it's still going to be branch circuit aluminum wiring. There's a reason it was outlawed pretty much. It was taken out of the ability to be able to use that part of it.
The foundation resonates, I think, with Stephanie and I, because we came from West Texas, where foundation repairs aren't very common out there, if at all, I feel like. And moving over here, I feel like that's been a hard one for me to explain, because it's a foreign concept, right?
Sure.
And so I completely agree with you on the verbiage on how you present that, because it can be very intimidating, especially to people who are moving into Texas. That is terrifying. And then you hear all these horror stories. And so, but anyways.
Right.
Well, like, here's one thing I try to tell, especially like new real estate folks that I meet. When I talk about foundations, I don't even use the word settlement. I just don't feel like it necessarily applies to what I'm trying to convey to people. I mean, anybody can use it. It's just one of those things. I always say that soil settles and foundations move as a result. And so if I go to a house and I'm working with some people and I show them a crack in the wall, that crack may not be from the foundation or the structure. That could be what's called a shrinkage crack. And shrinkage happens from expansion and contraction of materials, especially if you look at a home that was recently built. We all know how spec built houses go. The foundation gets poured on Friday and they start framing on Monday. And it's been raining on the lumber for 2 weeks, and it's wet. And as they put everything together, well, they're going to have shrinkage cracking. And that's where things like most dry or sheetrock cracks that people show me pictures of are due to poor installation, I would say. And sometimes it's because, like, if you go into one and you see where, a wall and a ceiling, or like a trade or something ceiling meet, that's a common place to see where you're going to find sheetrock separation or a poor tape job, because that's where the structure flexes the most. And that's one of those things that you just kind of have to take a look at it. You got a good inspector you work with, or somebody that knows that part of it, snap a pic and send it to them, and that way they could give you an opinion about what they're looking at. There's always those symptoms, but when it comes to looking at foundations, it's important to be able to know what you're looking at, like on a crack and brick veneer or something like that. Homes in the 70s, they didn't have things like expansion joints in the brick and all that kind of stuff, but they were built, much differently. And so when you see a big giant crack in a wall that doesn't have, an expansion joint, they could be something different. Everybody know what an expansion joint is? Everybody know what one of those is? An expansion joint? Trivia time?
Oh, okay. Sorry, I was on mute. I think I do, but I'm pretty sure I'm wrong.
Oh, it's okay. I think it's the American Brick Association. Every 25 feet in a brick veneer wall, you have to have what's called an expansion joint. So literally try to think about, they stop the course of brick and it runs up, and you'll see like a flexible sealant or something in there. And that's what an expansion joint. Or you'll see one around windows, and that's a very common place for shrinkage cracking to happen, or expansive cracking. And you'll see that long cut joint in there, and that's what a control joint is, that you're going to see in brick. And so most newer homes you see are going to have that. And if they don't, they're probably going to crack at some point, because that's just what they do. And, there's, like in this area, there's a company called Syntex Foundation Repair. They've been around since like the late 70s, and they have a neat thing called Hotspot Tracker. And you can actually look, and all the homes they've ever fixed or repaired are on that. And you can really see what areas are very common to know where you see foundation issues. I think it's Highland Park in Dallas. There's an area in there, they built a bunch of houses, and it's built like right on top of a watershed. And so ever since the 80s, they just constantly had foundation, issues they've had to fix, and, that kind of thing. Here where we are, if you get east of like Austin and east of Round Rock and east of Temple with all the black dirt, that's where people start to have issues the further east you go. And so it just really depends on the locale, when you look at something, for sure.
Seguin had some, there were some neighborhoods in Seguin that had similar problems last year as well. Okay. Number one, what do you see most common? Most common red flag.
Most common red flag.
Most common red flag.
I don't know. I don't know about like really red. I mean, I guess it really depends. Most common red flag, I guess, would be issues with smoke detectors.
Okay.
I'm going to say something that's a red flag and not just a normal deficiency, because
That's a
most of the smoke
safety.
detectors I see are out of date by like 10 years.
Okay.
You see the ones that get the little yellow hue to them, they don't mean that they're nicely aged like wine. That means that they're old. I think most of these manufacturers recommend every 8 to 10 years. And that's, if you look at them, if you open them up, the date's always there and you can be able to tell. Everything today is so much nicer because the new ones all have like a 15-year battery in there. You don't have like you go
Right.
into the house and there's one on a 10-foot ceiling that beeps for 3 hours. I can't get to it, to go take the battery out to make it stop. I've gotten to where now I carry 9-volt batteries. I can't take beeping incessantly for more than like 10 minutes just to help people out. I leave my note. I changed your battery out. So I don't listen to it beep anymore. But that's probably the most common, I would say, red flag item, because for whatever reason, nobody ever thinks about smoke detectors.
Right.
And that's an important one. Here's a trivia item for you ladies. When are carbon monoxide detectors required in a residential home?
When there's a gas line.
That's one. When a combustion appliance, yes, a gas burning appliance is present. What's the other reason? Attached garage.
Attached garage. Okay. I did not know that.
So here's a thought of an item of contention that comes between salespeople and inspectors sometimes, and it's duly noted. If you go to a home built in, let's say, 1991 or something, they did not require a carbon monoxide alarm in a house that didn't have combustion appliances and had an attached garage at that time. But it is part of our SOP and it is part of the new standard. And that's why we have to call that out. So if you see that come up and it says, why an attached garage? The reason is because if somebody has the door open and they're testing their Mustang out there, that kind of thing. Or if they leave something running, that kind of stuff. And everybody stores all the nasty stuff in the garage, so that's the purpose of it. But that would be my most common red flag is improper placement or out of date smoke detectors or the lack of thereof, in any combination.
I had an inspection done last week with an attached garage, and one of the requirements or one of the findings was that the garage door didn't have an automatic close.
Yes.
And so they recommended us installing one because of that reason.
Right. And that's actually a much newer code related item too, that came into the most recent version of the SOP for inspectors, that no matter the age of the home, we're required to report that as a defect for that reason. Just like if you see an older home that, like I had a home from the 50s last week, had a nice pretty wood door to the garage with glass in it. Well, that's a deficiency as well. And while it looks nice, it's a breach in fire separation. And so that's why we're required to report any breach in fire separation on the wall between the garage and the house, no matter the age of the home. That way people know that is something. That's why the codes change, because if you have a door with glass in it and a fire breaks out in the garage, it could travel through that opening much more quickly. Now, I've seen some reports come up before that wrote up a peephole, through the garage door or whatever. That's probably a little bit excessive, but that's okay. They're probably just doing their job. But the peepholes going garage door, well, you might know, what's the reason they put peepholes in doors to the garage?
I have no idea.
If it's a tenant occupied property, if it can have tenants in there. I don't know what the reason for that, but that's something I heard pop up once. That I've got a rent house, and when we put it up for rent, I had to have a guy come in and put a peephole in the door of the garage. So I don't know if it's a rule or what it is, but that was something I had to add. So I don't know what that's for, but I guess they can look out in case somebody's trying to come in the garage.
Right.
Interesting. I'm like adding to my honey-do list.
I wouldn't put a peephole in your garage, but the self-closing hinges are nice. I mean, that's the whole purpose of what they're for. And if you ever wanted to, I could email you the case study behind that about why those came to be in the code. Unfortunately, when codes change and they have stricter safety things, but usually because someone was hurt or passed away. And that was the case. In fact, that the reason that is because the door didn't close, and the people went to bed and left their car running all night, and then all the carbon monoxide came through, and that's what happened. That's the reason that changed.
It's awful.
So another conversation that came up recently is home inspections on new builds. So tell us about the difference between new builds and old builds, and what you find on homes that have been long time established versus your new builds.
Existing homes, the most common defects I see on those are deferred maintenance issues, and then what we talked about before, some are a mix between the homeowner trying to do things or hiring crappy contractors, or maybe if it's a remodeled or flipped home when it comes to existing homes and things that get done. New construction is a whole other beast. I can tell you, since COVID started, it's been some of the worst new construction I've ever seen in my career. Not all around, but and it has a lot to do with the price of materials and the type of subcontractors that were available and whatnot. I think that every person needs to protect themselves and find a third-party company to come in and look at a new construction home, because there's so much. And I think the most important time for someone to look at a new construction is when it's in the pre-drywall phase. There is so much that can be covered up by sheetrock that people would never know about. And then when you get people that call you and say, well, my house has a weird smell, it's because they didn't vent it right, or the vent detached on the wall because it wasn't glued, or something so simple that could have been, wouldn't have had an issue. Or they start to have a wall crack in one location because the plumber came through and he bored a hole this big around in a 2x6 or 2x4, and now it's starting to give way on that corner, over the weight of time, kind of thing. There's so much more. I mean, if you ever watch when they go build new construction, everybody know what a structural truss is. A site-built home is built obviously 100% on site, but a truss built, or like a roof truss, they manufacture them somewhere and they haul them in. When they drop them things off the truck, a lot of times they just bust all the pieces, and the guys are out there like trying to patch them back together. And if you did not have someone go through and take the time, 2 or 3 hours, however long, to go look at it, you'd never know that happened. You would never know that. I would say you never know. You would never have the opportunity to try to see that there was an issue that existed. Just so everybody knows, trusses cannot be repaired in the field just by somebody. Repair has to be approved by the engineer architect that works for the truss manufacturing company. So if you see where some are coming up and people are just patching them together, they're supposed to be associated and have a letter of approval from that company to accommodate, to be there with the repair whenever you go look at it. So if you have an inspector call something like that out and you just see them patch it, you tell them, no, I want to have this repair, approved by this company so that I can make sure everything's good. That's one of those things that's a real common one that I see in new construction, especially spec built houses. Is not uncommon. Water hammer is another one. Everybody know what water hammer is? When you don't secure piping the right way, even PEX, and someone turned on the shower and you hear it vibrating in the wall, that's not good. That's not normal. That's not the pressure change or whatever. That's improperly secured piping. Another item that could have been easily documented during a third-party inspection of a new construction at pre-drywall phase. Once the sheetrock's up, you're not going to know what it looks like. It's already going to be concealed, that thing. And new construction, roofs is always one. Every single new build I look at, there's roof issues. Easily fixed.
Really?
But just about every single one I go to, there's going to be roof issues. I can almost always expect it. And I hate to say it, but at the point now I'm at, I can almost know the neighborhood and the builder and know that whatever roofing guys they have, there's going to be issues and stuff that's easy to fix, most likely. But It's one of those ones that you're not going to know about it. And this is the thing about it for the buyer. The builder could tell the inspector to pack sand. They could tell him, we're not going to do any of this stuff where this guy knows what he's talking about. The cool thing about it is now it's documented. Now your clients have paid for a third-party person to come in and they documented these issues. And if something were to come up, especially in the warranty period, well, they've got a lot more to rely on at that point. You know, like I looked it up. I went to a warranty inspection last week too, and the people were having electrical issues in their garage feeder panel or sub panel. And the builder had the electrician come back and took out the arc fault breakers and put in standard breakers because why? They kept tripping. And so that's not the way to do it. And that's one of those ones that it's pretty scary what some people will do to try to help people out. And so I said, well, why don't you hire a third party electrician to come in? And what do you know? There was issues with the circuits, and ended up being one of them was crimped off somewhere, and it was causing it to arc out, and that's what was causing the breaker to constantly trip. Every time they put a load on the circuit, it was getting overheated, and that's what arc fault breakers are supposed to do. You know, and that's one of those ones that you would never see that wiring if the sheetrock is already up, you know.
Right.
But I'm sure you guys have seen it or dealt with it, and you probably know a builder that does it. There are builders now that try to keep third-party inspectors out. They have up these things they want them to sign, and they say you can't go on the roof, and you can't open the panel, and you can't go in the attic, and you can't do this and that. Just so you know, everybody has a little piece of information. That OSHA rule that they come up with to say that inspectors can't crawl on the roof, it does not apply to inspectors or insurance agents. It only applies to contractors that owner hires. So if they ever tell you that again, you say, well, you're off a little bit on that one. I mean, it's their roof, you know, if they don't want us to crawl on it, but they can't state it's an OSHA violation because it's not. I had it out with a builder once about that because he wouldn't let me inspect the roof. I was like, I'm not going to go there if you want me to, but don't tell me it's because of OSHA because it ain't the truth. They're right down the street. You need to go get them. I didn't do that, but I just, and would you believe those people are having roof problems now, leaking issues during the last couple of rains. And like I said, stuff that could have been easily documented, you know, while a roof's already finished, because there's a zillion things I could tell you about that comes to roofs that are just, I call it Beer 30, the joke on that one, you know, people get in a hurry and then they go through, and that's the problem with new construction. Well, no matter how nice the builder is or how good they are in their reputation, they're only as good as the people they hire. And so it's not actually the builder out doing everything. And so I know lots of builders, great people, but it's not, it's all about some of these contractors that they have and how well they do, you know. I would tell people the single most important thing they could possibly do if they're going to build a house is to hire a company to come in at the very least to inspect the exterior water resistant barrier and all that if they're going to have stucco installed. That's a really, really big one. There are so many issues all across the country with stucco. And it's one of those things that I think people have this like blind, not really blind, they have this thought that maybe the city people or the municipal inspectors are coming in, they're doing that. I mean, I see lots of municipal folks and unfortunately they might have 40 houses to do that day. So they might get like 15, 20 minutes on site. And that's not a lot of time to be able to go through and look for every little thing that you possibly can. You know, a stucco issue with lots of moisture coming through over a number of years could get into the tens of thousands of dollars for repair, you know, for something so minor like a piece of flashing, something that you can't see when the stucco is already put in place, most likely. You might, but it's pretty likely you're not going to see it until much later when you start to have a problem and then them dudes are long gone. It takes a whole lot more time and money to try to go after somebody that did a crappy stucco job after it's done 10 years later than when you have it before the stucco goes up and you say, I'm going to need this like $10 piece of flashing ASAP and not have this problem in the future. So I would say they both have their importance. I mean, you know, you've all been, you know, had a chance to see inspection reports on existing homes. You never know what you're going to run across, you know, whenever you go do that. And it just really kind of, it just kind of varies. I mean, I make a joke a lot that the biggest enemy of a home is a homeowner, you know, and that's one of those things that can happen on what they do. I don't know if that explained it the best I could. I just, you know, home inspections are their own entity, and it really just kind of depends on what you're trying to convey to people when you look at it. You say you go into an existing home and say, well, no, it's not going to be up to code because it's built in 1981, you know, and we're not going to expect it to be in perfect condition because it's a used home, you know. And that's one of those things that it's kind of, that's all that setting the client's expectations. But I think letting them know right off the get-go that refrigerator they're offering you, if you hurry up and close and don't get a third-party inspection, it's not worth some of the trouble you could deal with, you know, if you get to that point. I could show you some crazy stuff when it comes to new construction, like some of the things that people try to patch up and leave be for their new client. It's crazy. It's hard to believe sometimes, but if you have a good person you can align yourself with, or a company, they can go through and spend some time trying to figure it out. Here's a good example. In my neighborhood alone, I had two neighbors that opted to get a 10-month warranty inspection. Same dude that built my house. I hope I never see him on the street. But as a joke, by the way, no threats at all. They lived for 10 months through the Texas summer with no insulation whatsoever in their attic. None whatsoever. Now, you tell me how making all those calls to anybody they were talking to, they didn't take the 5 seconds it took me to crawl up in the attic and see that there was not a shred of insulation in there. Imagine having your little kids living in there with no insulation, having $800 electric bills for something so simple, you know. And that's one of those ones that, like, what do you do at that point? 10 months later, you know, and you know, $1,000 a month in electric stuff, that's a tough pill to swallow, you know, for something so simple.
That's wild. No insulation at all in the
None.
attic. They were just living in a hot box, huh?
Yep. And then all the
That's
people that
wild.
came by to try to tell them, you know, whatever, you know, whatever remedy they could do, like putting shades on their windows or whatever. It's crazy to me that people wouldn't go up and go check that, to say that
Right.
even having somebody come out to check the AC system to see if it's not functioning like it should. Well, sure, it ain't going to. It's running as hard as it can to try to cool off the house, and it ain't going to do it, you know. But
Right.
it happens a lot. I've seen lots of houses that didn't have things like insulation or whatever. Heck, I saw a new construction one time. They didn't run the sewer line from the house to the street. And how they got past that through all the city inspections and stuff, and then they were hooking up all the water and I guess they didn't test it. How do you forget a sewer line? You know, I didn't have to inspect it to figure that out. They were trying to dig it up and they figured it out on their own. But I'm assuming everything backed up and had mud in all the toilets and stuff, and that's what was going on.
Right.
No sewer line.
Okay. Pierce, do you have any more questions for Chris?
I think the one question I have for you is, are there any tips for us agents that you just wish we knew or had a better understanding of?
Or how we can better help you
Yes.
in setting our clients up and them knowing what to expect? And I know that's one of the things that you and I have talked about a lot in the past, Chris. A lot of people don't realize that home inspections are not necessarily pass or fail.
Sure.
It's subjective. So what can we do to help our clients, to set you guys up for a great inspection and preparing them for what they're going to get?
Tell them not to watch HDTV before.
Okay.
Not the joke. It's a joke. It's just, I have people that come in, they don't really know to the extent of what an inspection is going to be. Obviously, we can't go punch a hole in the wall or something like that, you know, on that part of it. I guess my thought would be is to try to set them in a position where they keep an open mind about what it is they're looking at. You know, obviously a report comes to them and there's this list of things like a door in a 1980s home that doesn't have self-closing hinges. Is that the biggest deal in the world? Probably not. If that's something they really want, you know, that's cool. But it's just one of those things that, as inspectors, here's a good one. This is probably the best thing to know. As inspectors, we are not creating a punch list for the seller to do on this house that they are selling. That's the biggest thing. What we were doing is we were educating this client about the home. And there are some things that we have to convey to them that there's a reason behind it. And we talked about something like that. So if that, like for instance, here's a big one. There is no such thing as grandfathering. I hear that one a lot. I've talked to lots of agent folks about it when I've talked to them before. None of us right now, and probably anybody that you know, has the authority to grandfather something. If you came to something like electrical, it would have to come down from pretty much the people that write the legislation for electrical to say that something is in place. Now, an electrician can say that, for instance, but now they're putting that, what do you call it? They're putting that weight on them to say that they are accepting it as something on their license, is what I'm trying to say. So if you find yourself in a position to where that is coming up in conversation, it's not so much that something is grandfathered. It's more like it may have been acceptable at the time of construction. Is probably more the idea behind it. So no, someone's not required to change out this self-closing hinge system on a door. But if they choose to, it's because they're concerned about their safety part of it. And that's probably one of the biggest things to consider when you look at it in a big perspective. That when people come into a house, a lot of the time when I have people that call me, they see the report like, good God, looking at all this stuff, like, hold on, let's go through it like page by page, and we can talk about some of this stuff so that you understand kind of what you're looking at. Like,
Right.
here's a good example. Mr. Homeowner comes in and he puts himself a man shed or a she shed out in the back, and they run electrical out there. Did you know that today's standard calls for that if you have a outbuilding with more than one branch circuit, it's required to have its own panel, its own means of service disconnect, and a grounding electroconductor, a ground rod. There's a couple different ways to do grounding electroconductors, but ground rod's the most common way to think about it. And so if I go in and see that in that house and I say, well, this is not right compared to today's standards, I'm also assuming that my client is probably going to do more work out there and maybe have power tools and such. So no, what they did is not grandfathered. In fact, it was done wrong the first time around. And then I'm also telling them what the new standard is, because if they hire a really good electrician, he or she is going to say, this is what I'm required to do to make sure that this place is good to go. Anything less than that, technically, is going against what their license tells them to do. And so I look at it like that. It's not so much that inspectors trying to make waves in this deal. It's more like they're trying to protect their client in a way so they understand. Like we had a house, Stephanie, that had galvanized piping in it. I believe that was one of the ones or whatever. Now, galvanized piping at one time was okay, and then after a long time it wasn't. And so if you look in what materials are allowed in the plumbing code, it is an obsolete material now. And so it's one of those ones that it's just one of those things that you have to consider that's out there. So it's good for people to know. And so it's us educating them. It's not an inspector saying you should replace all your galvanized plumbing. It's saying this is the risk of galvanized plumbing, to consider. Like there was an older house here I had last week, and it had all copper plumbing. It did not have a ground rod in the electrical system. That was very common in the 70s. It had what's called an electrical water bond, where they have the first water line coming into the house. They run a grounding electrode to it with a clamp, all cool at the time. However, they had been changing stuff around the house, and what did they do? They added both CPVC and PEX plumbing, essentially killing that water bond. And so I'm trying to talk to the two agents about it. They're just kind of like, I've never even heard of that before. And so once I explained it, they weren't so mad anymore. And it's saying like, look, I'm not trying to make things be new. I'm just telling you that this thing that worked and was perfectly allowed, it ain't going to work no more. So now just somebody has to go spend $50 or whatever it is and get the stuff and run a ground rod. Easy day. And that's kind of what it came down to. So it's more one of those things that occasionally you'll run into people that may not know why they're writing things down, but most of the guys I know do. And there's always a reason for it. That's our job, is to educate and to inform people, observe and report. And that's what inspection reports are for, that kind of thing. I'm sorry, my phone's ringing in the background somewhere.
No, you're good.
That's probably the biggest thing. I don't know. I try to stay in my lane when it comes to real estate stuff. I don't know anything about what you folks do when it comes to being real estate salespeople. I just kind of like do my thing, and that's I try to help out on that part and answer questions and whatnot. And kind of like or another thing too. There's no such thing as a VA inspection. The VA, they just utilize the same appraisers, and they have a different criteria obviously they follow when it comes to that. So I hear people say, "Oh, I'm getting a VA inspection." Like, it's not a thing. The appraiser is going to be there like 20 minutes trying to verify the house is worth that, and they don't have conducive termite conditions or something. But that's about it. I've never once in my time, I've never seen an appraiser on the roof before. So that's, some people think that they do go on the roof or they're going to go in the crawl space. I've never seen it. I don't know if they're supposed to or not, but I've never personally run across a man or woman that was an appraiser do any of those kind of things. So I don't know that they're going to get the same quality of overview as they would from hiring a third-party inspection company.
Right. Chris, thank you so much for your time today and for sharing all of your knowledge and all of the things. You're always a delight. I always enjoy time spent with you. This is going to be so great for all of our other agents in Realtor Revolution also to have access to this information. I need a picture of your business card too,
Yeah.
so that I can attach it for everybody. Again, thank you so much. We appreciate you.
We'll talk about pool cancer next time.
Okay, I'm
That'd be
down. I
fun.
want to hear about pool cancer because you need to educate me on pool cancer. So
Sure.
next
Tag me
session.
along.
Okay, next session is going to be on pool cancer. We're coming
Sounds
back
good.
for round 2.
All right.
Y'all have a great day.
All right. Thanks, y'all.
Bye.
Bye.